This is a Strong is a Mindset podcast, episode number 163. If your calendar is full, your to-do list is stacked, and taking care of yourself keeps getting pushed to the bottom, you are not alone. But it might not be a time issue. It might be a priority check. And that is exactly what we're digging into today. This is the Strong is a Mindset podcast, where you'll learn how to build both a strong body and a strong mind by eating, moving, and thinking. I'm your host, physician, personal trainer, certified health coach, and certified life coach, Carrie Holland. Hey, how are you? What's new? What's good? So, what's good here? Today, we're talking about priorities. And no, not in a vague motivational quote kind of way, but in a real, practical, call it like it is kind of way. This episode isn't just about time management. It's about self-management. So you can consider this episode a gut check about how we think, how we talk, and how we show up. Because I often hear women tell me that they want to make changes, eat better, move more, sleep more, think differently. But then immediately that want is followed with some version of, I just don't have the time. And sometimes it sounds like once work slows down, or once the kids are back in school, or I just need to get through this season first. And what I want to do today is help you unpack that, because more often than not, it's not about needing more hours in the day. Instead, it's about taking an honest look at what's running the show behind the scenes, your thoughts, your habits, your default patterns, and deciding if those things are actually creating the life you want. And to be fully honest, most of the time, the problem isn't your calendar, it's your clarity. And let me put something out there to begin with. This episode is not about blaming or shaming you for being busy. It's about looking under the surface. It's also about getting honest about what you're prioritizing, on purpose or by default, and whether it matches with what you actually want. It's about asking if your priorities are intentional or if they're just habits you've inherited or patterns that you've fallen into. Because when you say something matters, but your actions tell a different story, that disconnect can feel extremely frustrating. And I'm not here to scold you. I'm here to help you notice it, understand it, and shift it so your choices start reflecting the life you really want. So this is not just a call to get your priorities straight. We're going way beyond that so you can make small but noticeable shifts to include the things in your life that actually matter to you. All right, so let's go. So let's start here. I don't have time. It sounds like a fact. How many times have you said it? I know that I have said it plenty of times. It's commonplace. It's like saying, I'm fine. We don't even think about it. It doesn't even register. But at the same time, it sounds like something objective and irrefutable, something that just is. But often, I don't have time is really a story. And it's not just any story. It's one that you've told yourself so many times that it feels like the absolute truth. And it feels true because it feels familiar, because you've repeated it quietly in your head or out loud to others so often that it's become part of your identity. But just because something feels true doesn't mean that it's fact. Remember that facts are measurable, verifiable, concrete. A fact is there are 24 hours in a day. A story is I don't have time, because someone else with the same 24 hours might be spending theirs very differently. And while I just said that, let me also acknowledge here that when you say, I don't have time, it doesn't feel like a story. It feels like the honest truth. When you are drowning in emails, school forms, work deadlines, and your mental load, I don't have time feels very real. But the important thing to understand is that the way you think about your time is still a choice. And the language you use around your time, especially the story that you don't have any, is actually shaping how you live. So what do you do if you're constantly thinking to yourself, I don't have time? Well, start here. What if you started by just noticing that first? Not criticizing, not blaming, not judging, but just observing the way that that story shows up in your life and then asking yourself, is that really true? Or is this something that I've practiced believing for so long that it now feels like a fact? Because underneath the story of I don't have time is usually a quieter, more uncomfortable truth. This just isn't a priority right now. So let me slow down and let's really sit with that for a second, because this is a big one. There is a huge difference between not having time and not making something a priority. Saying you don't have time makes it sound like you are at the mercy of your schedule, like everything is happening to you. But saying something isn't a priority, that's you getting back into the driver's seat where you belong. That's you claiming ownership. That's you saying, I'm choosing to focus on something else right now. It is uncomfortable, for sure, but it's also honest. And I get it, that truth can sting. It may feel harsh, especially when you want something to be a priority, but just haven't followed through. It can feel like you're saying it doesn't matter to you, but that is not necessarily true. What you're really doing is acknowledging your current reality, that with the energy and bandwidth you have today, something else is taking precedence. And naming that clearly and specifically does not mean you're giving it up. Not at all. It just means that you're being honest about your capacity in the current season you're in. And that kind of honesty, while it might be hard, is powerful. It's what opens the door to change. Because once you stop spinning in guilt and overwhelm and start recognizing that you are making choices, even hard ones like making exercise less of a priority, if that's what you decide, for example, you begin to reclaim agency over your time and your life. So, to be super clear, stating that something isn't a priority doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you an honest one. And that is the point. Because honesty is what gives you back your power and puts you back in charge of your life and your decisions. It also doesn't mean that whatever isn't a priority now doesn't become one later. You have the authority to decide what you prioritize. So let me give you an example of this. I had a client who said over and over again that she wanted to work out in the morning. She said it was important to her and her schedule gave her time to do it. Her kids were older. She worked from home. She had everything she needed at home to exercise. But despite this, every morning, something else took over. The dog, her inbox, the dishes. It was always something. And she was not getting any exercise done. And so then when we really peeled it back, we realized that the issue wasn't her schedule. She actually had the time. Instead, it was her mindset. She wanted to exercise, but she wasn't prioritizing it. And that gap between what she wanted and what she was actually doing, that is where her work was. So now, if you just heard my client's story and you can relate, let me help you through this. And it starts by answering two questions. First, what do you say matters most to you? And then second, how are you spending your time? And I'm going to pause right there because I know those questions can feel really confronting. They are not small talk. These questions ask you to take a hard, honest look at your day-to-day and compare it to what you say matters. And that is not always an easy match. So it's normal to feel some resistance here, maybe even some shame or defensiveness. And if you're noticing a gap between what you care about and how you spend your time, you are not alone. That gap, it's common and it's human. And it's not a sign that you're failing. It's actually a sign that you're paying attention. So the truth is, most of us are running around on autopilot more than we realize. We've picked up habits, patterns, and expectations, some of them totally unconscious, that have been shaped by how we were raised, the roles we play, what's been rewarded in our careers, and what society tells us we should be doing. Maybe it's saying yes to everything to avoid disappointing others. Maybe it's constantly multitasking because slowing down feels unproductive. Maybe it's assuming you always have to be busy in order to be valuable. And these ways of operating often go unexamined because they feel normal. But just because they're familiar doesn't mean they align with what actually matters to you. And that is why this work matters. Because when you start noticing these automatic habits and inherited expectations, you can question them. You can ask, is this something that I genuinely value? Is this choice actually helping me? And is this how I want to live? So once again, this is not about perfection. It's about compassionately pulling back the layers and getting curious about how you're moving through your day and then choosing what stays and what doesn't. The goal here is not to judge yourself for being on autopilot and not making time to exercise. The goal is not to beat yourself up for not making time to cook dinner at home instead of going through the drive-thru to get fast food. The goal instead is to gently wake yourself up to what's really going on so you can start matching your time with your true values. Because when your time doesn't match your values, you don't have a time problem. You have a clarity opportunity. And clarity is something that we can work on with compassion instead of criticism. So if you're listening to this and you notice your own mismatch between what you care about and how you're spending your hours, don't panic. This is not about doing a 180 or making a giant pivot overnight. Instead, it's about taking stock and saying, I see this. Now, what can I do with it? So I want to give you some concrete ways to start bringing your priorities and your daily choices into better alignment so that what is important to you matches up with what you are actually doing. Here's how to get started. First, reconnect with what actually matters. You cannot act in alignment with your priorities if you do not know what they are. And this is where I'm going to bring in Stephen Covey's wisdom because it's a classic for a reason. And he says it so well. Here it is. When you have too many top priorities, you effectively have no top priorities. And I'll take it just a step further and add that if everything matters, at the end of the day, nothing matters. If you're trying to do all the things, you will end up running in circles and doing none of them well, feeling totally scattered and stretched thin. And we want to avoid that. So, with that in mind, I want to challenge you here. Think about your top 3 priorities, not 10, not the entire contents of your to-do list, just 3. Say them out loud to yourself. And what comes up for you? And most of the time, when I do this exercise with clients, the answer is some version of family, work, followed by a long pause, and then something like maybe my health or sleep or friends. And I get it. If you feel a pause, if you struggle to answer, or if you feel uncertainty about this, I got you. It's not a failure. If you can't name your top 3 priorities, often it's a sign that no one's really asked you to define them before. But now, here we are. Because until you know what actually matters, your time will get filled by what's urgent instead of what's important. And that's where we fall into the swirl. I've mentioned the swirl before. It's that disorganized, reactive space that so many women live in. It's the overcommitted calendar, the overbooked schedule, the jam-packed days where you're going through the motions but never coming up for air. It's autopilot, it's obligation, it's constant motion, but with no real direction. It's a swirl, all doing very little thinking because there's no time for that. And that swirl happens when your priorities aren't clear. When you don't know what really matters, when you don't name that for yourself, everything starts to matter equally, and that is totally exhausting. So, if you're stuck in the swirl, one of the best things you can do is pause and ask, what actually matters most to me? I did this myself when I was caught up in my own swirl, feeling like I had no way out. And I decided that my number 1 priority was my wellness. And if you just gasped because I admitted that out loud, I hear you. But let me take this a step further. I took my priority of wellness and elaborated. And here's what I came up with. My priority is to eat, move, and think in a way that results in me feeling strong mentally and physically. And I came up with that statement because my second priority is my family. And when I say that, what I mean is that my priority is to be a loving, present, engaged role model to my family. And the only way I can do that is if I take care of myself. So even though those priorities are separate, they're related. And I decided to put my wellness as my top priority so that I could attend to my second priority, which is my family. And the whole point here is that if you've never done this before, name it. Say what your priorities are. But then go a little further than simply saying wellness. What does that mean? If your priority is family, what does that mean to you? Don't stop at one word. Challenge yourself to get super specific about your priorities. And remember, no more than 2 or 3. Okay? Once you've named your top priorities, your real ones, not your shoulds or your autopilot responses, the next question then becomes, does your time reflect that? And that's where things can get uncomfortable, but also really clarifying, because it's one thing to say that wellness or rest or creativity or family is a priority, and it's another thing to look at your calendar and realize that those things are nowhere to be found. So if there is a mismatch between your priorities and how you're spending your time and energy, the next step is to get curious instead of critical. And I know I say that word curious a lot, but I think it's a better, kinder, more invested approach than beating yourself up. So the idea is to be willing to ask questions and learn more, to be curious, instead of wagging your finger and getting down on yourself if you're not spending your time the way you want to. And the goal, again, is not perfection, it's awareness. And the best way to build that awareness is to track where your time's actually going. And if you're not sure how to do that, do a time audit. It does not have to be fancy. Just jot down for a few days where your time is actually going, hour by hour, and be totally honest. Netflix counts, scrolling your phone counts, sitting in traffic, answering emails, folding laundry, it all counts. And then after a few days, step back and look. See how much of your time is going to the things that you said mattered most. How much of your time is going to things that aren't even on your list. So I did this myself just recently. I have admittedly not been getting all the things I want to get done during my workday, and one of my priorities is writing. But I found that very little of my time was actually going towards writing, and I wasn't sure why that kept happening. So I made a commitment to have a little piece of paper with me just for a few days, and I wrote down to the minute where all of my time was going. And what I realized is that I needed to shift some things around and change my approach to work, my scheduling, all of it, in order to actually make time for the writing I want to do. So I could have just chalked it up to too much time on social media or too much time on the Apple News app, but that wasn't it. There were a number of other work-related tasks that I wasn't even taking into account that were eating away at my time. It actually was not social media. So I've been actively working to reduce and eliminate the extra tasks to give more time to writing. It is most definitely a work in progress, but I never would have made that headway if I hadn't actually looked at where all my time was going. So if you've never done a time audit, I highly recommend it. Don't just guess where all of your time and energy is going. Get the data to know where it's actually going. And again, this is not about shame. It's about clarity, data, honesty. And it's also about getting real with yourself, not to beat yourself up, but to start making different decisions. So you can see, okay, this isn't matching up. Now that I see it, what do I want to do with it? What do I want to shift? Once you've done a time audit and have a better sense of how your hours are actually being spent, you can start making decisions from a clearer place. And this is where your priorities become super powerful, not just as ideas, but as a filter. When new demands come up, as they most certainly will, you can run them through the lens of your top priorities and ask yourself, does this align with what I said matters most? Is this helping me live more in line with my priorities, or is it pulling me away from them? So, as an example, when you're asked to show up early for a work meeting that will eat into your workout time, you've got a choice to make. And you can use your priorities as your filter. If advancing at work is a priority and being at that meeting is required and will help you do that, then you might choose to say yes to that meeting. If that early morning hour is the only time that you've got to get a workout in and exercise is your higher priority, then you might choose to say no to that meeting. And the key here is that there is no right or wrong answer. There's only your answer. And my goal is that you make an empowered choice. That means you're making your decision intentionally. You've done your internal work and you like your reasons for the choice you're making. I choose to say no to this meeting because exercise is a priority to me, and this is the only time I can get it in. That is going to feel very different from agreeing because you feel like you have to in order to not let anyone else down. And it won't always be a clear yes or no. Sometimes it's a yes, but not right now. Sometimes it's a not me, not this season response. But the point here is this: when your priorities are clear, decisions get easier because then you're not just reacting, you're choosing. And this doesn't mean that you'll never do things outside your top 2 or 3 priorities. No, but using your priorities as a filter helps you protect your energy, set boundaries with more confidence, and avoid slipping back into the swirl. You're moving with intention instead of obligation. And that is a huge shift. And here's the best part: the more you align your time with your real priorities, the less overwhelmed you'll feel. Not because your life magically got less full, but because now it's full of the right stuff that reflects who you are and who you want to be. And one other thing I want to mention, I want to speak to the very real experience of feeling stuck. If you are hearing all of this and thinking, that sounds great, but my schedule is jam-packed from the minute I wake up to the minute I go to bed, and there is literally no room to change anything, I hear you. I've coached enough physicians, lawyers, high-level executives, parents, caregivers, people with very real demands on their time to know that this isn't just an excuse. It feels true. Your schedule and routine feel immovable. And I'm not here to argue with your reality. You've built a life full of responsibilities. You care deeply about the people that you serve, your patients, your team, your family. All of that matters. But I also want to gently suggest that feeling stuck is not the same as being stuck. Sometimes it's not the external constraints that are keeping you boxed in. Instead, it's your internal belief that there are no other options. And that belief is powerful. It shapes what you even allow yourself to consider. So here's the truth. It is possible to change your life. It is also possible to change your schedule. But, and here's the part no one likes, it might come with trade-offs. It might mean making less money, slowing your climb up the ladder, letting go of some of the prestige or a lifestyle that you've worked hard to build. And there's nothing wrong with wanting those things, but everything has a cost. And for many of the people I work with, that cost has been their health, their peace, their relationships, their sleep, their sanity. And you get to decide what it's all worth to you. And no, this is not about throwing it all away. It's about acknowledging that your time, energy, and attention, they're finite. And if you want something to change, something else might have to give. And you don't have to decide today, but I want you to know options do exist. Yes, they might be hard. They might be super uncomfortable, but they are there. And you have the authority to consider them. So I'm going to call on the great Brené Brown here and offer you her wise words. Just as you're capable of creating an overscheduled life, you are also capable of uncreating it. And this does not mean you have to go and blow up your life and start from scratch. I'm simply encouraging you to really think about whether there might be a different way. a tiny shift, a 10-minute opening, a task that can be delegated or dropped, a belief that can be challenged. Sometimes the biggest change starts not by overhauling your schedule, but instead by asking, is this really true? Or is it just the way I've always done it? And you do not have to solve it all today, but even being willing to look for possibilities, that is where your change begins. So here is the big takeaway I want to leave you with. You do not need more time. Instead, I would offer that you need more clarity. You need more honesty about how you're spending your time and why. And you need to trust that change is possible, even if it's small, even if it's slow, and even if it's uncomfortable. Because here's the truth I really want you to hear. Your life is not set in stone. Your schedule, it is not fixed for forever. It really isn't. There may be constraints, yes. Real responsibilities, yes. But within those constraints, there are always choices. There are always micro adjustments, small pivots, or opportunities to realign. You just have to be willing to look for them. And you have to be willing to make some hard decisions now that ultimately can bring you peace later. And I want to say this clearly. You are not doing it wrong if your time doesn't fully reflect your values yet. That is normal. It's part of being human. But now that you see the gap, now that you've named it, you get to do something with it. You get to take a step. You get to ask, what is one thing I can shift to reflect what really matters to me? So start small, but start now. All right? And if you want help figuring out your first step, let's go. If you want support as you make your time match your values, this is exactly the kind of work we do in coaching. We slow down, we get honest, and we make decisions on purpose. Check out my website, head to www.carriehollandmd.com/contact, and let's talk about how coaching will help you stop spinning and start creating a life that actually feels like yours. All right? Thank you again for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you again next week. Hey, if you want to build muscle but don't know where to start, I've got you covered. Head over to carriehollandmd.com/buildstrength and download my free guide to help you maximize your strength training. Inside, you'll find the essential exercises for building muscle, plus simple 1, 2, and 3-day workout plans that you can follow with just dumbbells and a bench. You'll also find strength training tips to help you train smarter and see real results. My goal is to help you get strong, and this strength training guide will help you do it. Go to carriehollandmd.com/buildstrength and check it out. Thank you for listening to the Strong is a Mindset podcast. If you want to learn more about how to build both a strong mind and a strong body by eating, moving, and most importantly, thinking, check out carriehollandmd.com.